He walked in quietly, wearing no fancy suit, no entourage behind him, just a calm smile and a humble presence. To the waiter, he looked like any other average customer, maybe even less impressive than most. So the eye rolls started, the snarky tone followed, and the disrespect wasn't subtle. What that waiter didn't know was this ordinary man not only owned the restaurant, but had a reputation for kindness that echoed louder than any Hollywood fame. What followed next wasn't a revenge scene. It was something far more unexpected. This wasn't about putting someone in their place. It was about lifting someone up, even when they didn't deserve it. This is the story of how one of the world's most beloved stars handled humiliation with grace and taught an unforgettable lesson in humility, humanity, and heart. Stick around, because what happens in the final minutes, you won't see it coming, and it might just restore your faith in people. It started like any ordinary day, no red carpet, no spotlight, just a quiet entrance into a restaurant, the kind of place people go to unwind after a long day. He walked in alone, no entourage, no designer suit, no loud announcement of who he was. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and a calm presence that didn't ask for attention. And that's exactly why he didn't get any. In fact, he got the opposite. As he approached the host's stand, there was a slight pause, a glance exchanged between the waiter and the hostess. You know, the kind of judgment that comes not from what you say, but how you say nothing at all. The waiter greeted him with that fake smile, the one you can spot a mile away. He looked him up and down, clearly unimpressed, probably thinking, another nobody trying to sneak into a place like this. And right then, a silent decision was made, a decision based solely on appearance. The waiter led him to the worst seat in the house near the kitchen, where every slam of a pan or shout from a cook echoed loudly. It was the kind of table usually reserved for walk-ins at closing time, and yet not a word of protest. No raised eyebrow, no indignation. Just a nod and a quiet thank you as he took his seat. That's when the real show began. From then on, the service was rushed, curt, almost dismissive. Menus slapped onto the table, eye contact avoided. Other guests were met with warmth and charm. He was treated like a problem that needed to be quickly dealt with. But what the waiter failed to see, what most people fail to see, is that respect isn't something you give only to those you think are powerful. It's something you give to everyone, because it speaks more about you than it ever does about them. And here's the part that stings, because so many of us have been there, judged for how we look, ignored because we don't fit the image someone else had in their head. We're taught to size people up in seconds, but rarely are we taught to see them fully, to recognize the soul, the story, the humanity behind the face. But here's the thing. Just because someone walks in without making noise doesn't mean they're insignificant. Just because they don't demand respect doesn't mean they haven't earned it 1,000 times over. Some people choose silence not because they're weak, but because they've mastered their strength. You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat someone they think can do nothing for them. That's where this story begins. But trust me, that's not where it ends. It wasn't just bad service. It was intentional. You could feel it. The little jabs, the rolled eyes, the way the waiter spoke just a bit louder when taking the next table's order, as if to make a point. Every move carried a quiet insult, not enough to cause a scene, but just enough to be felt. Water dropped on the table like it was a burden. Questions about the menu answered with sarcasm. And the tone, that cold, performative politeness that hides contempt behind a smile. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a mistake or a busy shift. This was personal, at least from the waiter's side. He'd decided, somewhere between that first glance and the seat by the kitchen, that the man sitting there didn't deserve respect, that he wasn't important, that he wasn't worth the effort. And that's the dangerous part of judgment. It doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it's just ego wanting to feel superior, wanting to flex a little power in a world where you feel small. That waiter didn't see a global icon or a successful businessman. He saw someone he thought he could walk over without consequence. He thought he was safe in his assumption, and in that safety, he let his worst side show. But the man at that table, he didn't flinch, didn't respond with anger, didn't match sarcasm with sarcasm. He just smiled, nodded, said thank you, even when the service was undeserving. Not because he didn't notice, he noticed every little thing, but he knew something the waiter didn't, that how you treat people is never about them, it's always about you. And to the people watching, that contrast became more and more obvious. The grace at the table, the arrogance around it. There was a quiet power in how he carried himself, like he had nothing to prove, no need to remind anyone of who he was or what he owned. He let the disrespect play out, because sometimes when you let people show their true colors, they paint their own lesson. And this wasn't about revenge, it never was. It wasn't even about embarrassment, this moment. This interaction was about something deeper. About how quickly we forget that every person deserves kindness. About how easy it is to become the kind of person who only shows respect upward but punches down when they think no one's watching. But someone was watching, and what that waiter didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that he wasn't serving a nobody that night. He was serving the very person who signs the checks, owns the chairs, and built the place from the ground up. But instead of calling him out, he let him keep digging. There's something powerful about staying still when the world expects you to react. When someone disrespects you, the instinct is to push back, to remind them who you are, what you've done, or how far you've come. But not everyone takes that road. Some choose silence, not out of weakness, but because they understand that real strength doesn't need to shout. He sat there, calm, collected, watching it all unfold. The dismissive tone, the careless attitude, the obvious effort to belittle him. Most people would have snapped by then. Most would have asked for a manager, maybe even walked out. But he didn't. Not because he didn't care, but because he did, because he knew what this moment could be, and that's what made the difference. He watched the waiter carry himself with misplaced confidence, treating other guests like royalty, while throwing scraps of service his way. He noticed how the staff followed the same rhythm, feeding off that energy. It was almost like they had silently agreed this guest didn't matter. But what none of them realized was that the man sitting at that table had seen this scene play out before. Many times, and each time it reminded him of something. The world doesn't need more people shouting for respect. It needs more people living in a way that earns it without ever asking for it. He didn't need to prove his status. He didn't flash a card, didn't make a call, didn't whisper to the manager or send a text. He just observed quietly, gracefully, letting every moment reveal something bigger than just bad service. It was revealing character. And here's what's wild: sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply letting people expose themselves. Because when someone thinks there's no consequence, when they think you're beneath them, that's when their real self shows up. That's when the mask drops. And when you stay calm, stay grounded, it creates a mirror so clear they can't help but see themselves in it. He could have ended it all right there. He could have stood up, introduced himself, and flipped the script with one sentence. But he didn't, because this wasn't about ego. It was about giving someone the space to learn. And sometimes people only learn when they reach the edge of their own behavior and see who they've become. The beauty of moments like this is they don't just test the other person. They reveal you to yourself. Will you stoop to their level? Will you let their energy pull you down? Or will you rise above without ever leaving your seat? He chose to rise quietly, without saying a word, and in doing so, he didn't just own the restaurant. He owned the moment. It happened quickly, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The waiter had just walked away, still wearing that smug look, still convinced he was serving someone unimportant. But then the manager came out from the back, eyes scanning the room with a nervous urgency. His gaze landed on the table in the corner, the one the waiter had tried to ignore all night. And in that instant, something changed. The manager's face dropped, and you could almost see the realization hit him like a wave. He walked straight over, suddenly careful, suddenly respectful, not performative this time, but real. Leaning in, he whispered a few words, and just like that, the entire atmosphere of the room flipped. The waiter, standing a few feet away, caught part of it. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally fear. You could see the color drain from his face as the truth set in. The man he'd been mocking, brushing off, practically laughing at behind his back. He wasn't just another customer. He was the owner, the founder, the man who made the place possible. The silence that followed was deafening. That moment, when your own arrogance collides head-on with reality, it humbles you fast. The waiter froze, unsure whether to walk away or walk over. His world had just shifted beneath his feet, and all the judgment he had thrown earlier, it now circled back like a boomerang. And still, the man at the table didn't flinch. No smug smile, no gotcha a moment, just the same calm presence, the same unshaken demeanor that had been there since the beginning. Because he didn't need to rub it in. He didn't need the apology. What he needed, what he was waiting for, was that moment of recognition. That pause in time where someone finally sees themselves clearly. What made it even more powerful was what didn't happen. No public humiliation, no fiery speech, no immediate firing, just a quiet conversation away from the crowd. No one heard the words exchanged, but everyone felt the weight of them. Not punishment, not revenge, just a choice to handle things differently. That's the moment that stuck with everyone, not the reveal, but the restraint. Because real power doesn't need to roar. It doesn't need a stage or a spotlight. It knows exactly who it is, and it moves with the kind of quiet confidence that makes noise without making a scene. And in a world that's always looking for drama, sometimes the most dramatic thing you can do is stay kind. He could have fired him right then and there. No questions asked, he had every right to. The disrespect, the attitude, the treatment anyone else in that position would have made a public example out of it. And honestly, most people would have clapped. That kind of "you messed with the wrong person" moment plays well in stories, right? But that's not what happened, because sometimes the best kind of justice doesn't come loud. Instead of embarrassment, there was empathy. Instead of punishment, there was perspective. He asked the waiter to step aside, not in front of the staff, not in front of the guests, just the two of them. And he didn't raise his voice. He didn't list his accomplishments or remind him who he was. He asked a question. A simple one: is that how you treat everyone who walks in here? That question landed harder than any lecture ever could. The waiter, who had been so full of attitude just moments ago, suddenly didn't have much to say. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the shame of being caught. Or maybe for the first time, he realized how easy it is to misjudge someone when you're looking through the lens of ego. What followed wasn't a firing. It was a conversation. He talked to him about what it means to lead with kindness, about how every person that walks through those doors deserves respect, no matter what they look like or how much they spend. He talked about humility, about the power of patience, and how every job, no matter how small it seems, carries the opportunity to make someone's day better, or worse. And then he said something the waiter didn't expect. He told him he wasn't being let go, not because he deserved to stay, but because he needed to learn. Because growth doesn't happen when you're pushed out. It happens when someone gives you a second chance you didn't earn. That's the kind of moment that stays with you, that replays in your head long after the night ends. Not because you got away with something, but because someone saw more in you than you were showing in that moment. And that's what made it so powerful. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about planting one. It was about choosing humanity over pride, compassion over ego. It was about turning a moment of conflict into a lesson in grace, one that the waiter would carry with him for the rest of his life. Because anyone can flex power, but choosing to lead with kindness, that takes something far greater. By the end of the night, something had shifted, not just in the waiter, but in the room itself. You could feel it. There was this quiet energy, the kind that doesn't come from drama or confrontation, but from understanding. Everyone who'd seen the way things played out, who noticed the attitude, the disrespect, and the way it had all been handled, walked away with something they didn't expect: perspective. The waiter, who had started the night with judgment in his eyes, ended it with his head low and heart cracked wide open. Not because he was humiliated, but because he'd been seen and forgiven. And when someone offers you grace in a moment where you deserve anything but, that sticks with you. That changes you. You could tell he'd learned something real, not just about customer service or professionalism or any of that surface-level stuff, but about people, about the danger of assumptions, about how quickly we assign worth based on appearances, only to find out, too late, that we were looking at everything upside down. And here's the thing, no one in that restaurant would ever look at a guest the same way again. That lesson didn't just belong to the waiter. It rippled out to every staff member, every person seated nearby, anyone who witnessed what true humility looks like when it walks in quietly and handles disrespect with dignity. There were no cameras, no social media moment. Just real people in a real room watching something rare. Power choosing not to crush, but to correct. That kind of thing doesn't just teach, it inspires. Because in a world that tells us to clap back, to cancel, to get even, what happened that night was the opposite. It was about rising above, even when every part of you has the right to retaliate. And that's the legacy of moments like this. Not the twist of who owned what, or how wrong someone was, but how right it feels when someone chooses heart over heat. When someone who could have made the night about them decides instead to make it a lesson for someone else. Because greatness doesn't need an audience to prove itself. It just needs a decision, a choice to walk the high road when the low one is wide open and well lit. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. You never know who you're standing in front of, but more importantly, you never know who you're becoming in that moment. And in the end, it wasn't about titles or ownership or putting anyone in their place. It was about choosing to be something this world doesn't always expect: gracious when you have the power not to be, kind when you've been wronged, still when the moment dares you to explode. That night didn't end with applause or cameras or grand declarations. It ended with a quiet man walking out the same way he came in, unnoticed by most, unforgettable to the few who paid attention, because the loudest lessons are often taught in silence.